All right. Peter, Clive, welcome to Proof of Thought Pod. So glad to have you guys here with us finally today. Clive, I wanted to start with you. Peter, I'll come to you next. But Clive, wanted to start with you. You come from my understanding, a Navy background. Could you tell us a little bit more about your background and journey into the investing world, though?
Yeah, let's see. So I always wanted to invest when I was a kid. I was like, my goal is to have $2 million, earn 5% off the interest, earn 100K a year with a CD or something. And that's as far as it went as a teenager. And then when I was in the Navy, I downloaded a bunch of Walmart minute by minute data, like 10 years of minute by minute data, looking for correlations, and I found reversals at the first 15-minute point, stuff like that. Found some interesting things. Then I learned about stock options, and couldn't believe that you can literally look at things like Bollinger Bands, look at technical analysis, look for rebound points, pivot points, and go from there. And if you're good at it, you can paper trade all you want, and if you're good at it, then you can literally retire off that. So really, just the math, pattern recognition sort of stuff. I love geometry, prime numbers, all that stuff, and just everything comes together with Microsoft Excel and a bunch of charts.
Hey, wonderful. And Peter, how about you? You come from a traditional finance background, but not necessarily Wall Street stock picking. So when you did start seriously exploring the public markets as a retail investor, how did you get yourself up to speed?
So I guess even though I've worked in traditional finance for my entire career, 14 years up to this point, I actually never studied any accounting, finance, economics when I went to college. Um, it's funny, like I went to UCLA, which is a good university. However, I studied, the wrong major, if you will, right? I studied environmental science, and let me take a step back, right? Like I'm from a Chinese immigrant family. Ever since being a little kid, my parents would say, "Hey, study hard, go to a good university, get a good job," right? And so I did, study hard. I did go to the good university, but what I lacked is the fact that that's not it, right? Like you need to get internships in order to land a good job. And so I bring that up because when I graduated, I fell flat on my face because I didn't have relevant internship experience. Matter of fact, I vividly remember that Red Cross offered me a $400 a month stipend. They had to use the word stipend because it was actually below minimum wage. And so I was very displeased with that. And I thought, well, okay, what do I want to do with my life? One, I wanted to make money. Two, I wanted to learn how to make my money work for me. And three, I looked at my fraternity brothers at UCLA, and the ones I admired the most all ended up in Wall Street. And so I pretty much said, hey, I'm gonna try to break into Wall Street, right? And it took me over a year of working for free, another year of making minimum wage, but I was working 70, 80 hours. And then finally, the year after that, I had my own office in Newport Beach. So all that to be said is I have, that traditional 14 years of finance experience, but it was a rather unconventional way on how I got there.
Wow. Awesome, guys. Amazing story. And I know it's just the beginning for you guys. So excited to see where it's all going to go. But wanted to dive deeper into Metaplanet. We have a segment on our show that we call First Principles, which we essentially use to kind of break down ideas step by step. So we'd love to really get into how you guys think about certain things. Clyde, wanted to start with you. And just for those who don't know, to clarify, Metaplanet is a Japanese based company. They're essentially, you can think of them, they're doing something very similar to what MicroStrategy is doing, except they are a much smaller company and are growing at lightning speed. And you guys will obviously learn more about them, about Metaplanet today with our two guests here. But just with that brief intro, Klein, wanted to go to you on Metaplanet here. So I know on April 25th, Metaplanet's MNAV was at one of its lowest points, even as Bitcoin was moving up and other BTC treasury companies were also climbing higher. And for me, that stood out as clear signal at the time. And I think around that time, or the very next day, I saw you posting about it on X. Peter sort of referenced this as well. And for me, I was like, this guy totally gets it. My understanding is that at this point, you're now all in on Metaplanet and cash. And so, just breaking this down from first principles, what were your top thesis points that made you decide that time in April was the right moment to act and go really hard in on this asset?
I did some simple calculations. I fine tuned them later. I realized I was a little bit off, but directionally I was correct enough. It didn't matter. So when I got into Metaplanet, late April, like April 25th, I think is when I started buying, and they had 5,000 Bitcoin. And I thought, okay, if they can keep a decent MNAV, 3 to 5 range, something like that, by the time they hit 100K or a little over Bitcoin, on the balance sheet. So by the time they 20x their Bitcoin held, they should be able to roughly 10x their Bitcoin per share. So that totally balances out the MNAV and overshoots it, right? So like I think when I started buying, the MNAV was like 2.5 or something. It's higher than strategy, which is another positive sign, and I've kind of came up with some ideas of why that's important later on. But the basic thing was I want to be in this long enough for them to 10 to 20x their Bitcoin per share, and I believe that that's going to happen. It could happen as early as 2 years. It could, to me, kind of 2 to 5 years is the range there. And then in order to make this a 100x investment, essentially, I need Bitcoin to do a 5 to 10x. If Metaplanet's doing a 10 to 20x of their Bitcoin per share, that's, balances out to about 100x. So that seemed to be a good thesis. The whole game is to beat Bitcoin, to outperform Bitcoin. And with strategy being such a dominant player, they're, to me, really the thing to compare yourself to. So, I wouldn't touch anything else other than strategy unless I thought that they could run a lot faster, essentially. So that's it.
No, great analysis. And just circling back a little bit, are you guys sharing a lot of this analysis, I imagine, on your Discord as well?
Yeah, it all ends up there. The structure is a lot better on what I share on X. Discord is a little, it's a lot more free form, and people reference things, but it's just kind of all over the place.
Okay. And if you guys want to share the name of your Discord as well for our listeners, how could they go out and find it?
Yeah, it's Metaplanet Dojo Discord, and if you search for me on X at Actually Climber, you should be able to see it. I think it's in my profile.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay. Well, back to first principles. And Peter, wanted to come to you. I know you've talked quite a bit about the marketing side and the importance of community when it comes to not just Metaplanet, MicroStrategies, but also other Bitcoin treasury companies. I'm curious, what specifically has Metaplanet gotten right on the marketing front?
Great question. So first of all, right, in episode 2, I started off the episode by trying to I tried to show the YouTube video, but because there was no audio, I had to kind of explain to the audience what I was showing. So it's a very short TED Talk that was done 15 years ago, and the title of the TED Talk was "How to Start a Movement." It's a video, a very short video of a guy at a music festival dancing kind of wild, and for a while he was kind of dancing by himself, looking like a crazy person. But eventually, another person decided to go up to him and start dancing with him. And now there is less social pressure. And so more and more people felt, hey, it's okay to go up and dance as a collective, right? So why that was important to me is because that very first crazy dancer to me is strategy or MSTR, right? They have this 5-year head start. In my mind, they have this insurmountable lead to acquire the most amount of Bitcoin in the world. Okay, but that doesn't mean that others are not joining. Matter of fact, one of the first companies to start a Bitcoin treasury company outside of MSTR was Metaplanet, right? They've been executing this strategy for a little bit over a year now. But you also start seeing other Bitcoin treasury companies popping up. Okay. So I kind of relate this to what I wasn't participating back then, but from what I learned of the 2017 ICO movements, when there was a lot of crypto projects popping up left and right. And at first, any project that popped up was like printing money, right? But eventually there was some sort of exhaustion. And then there was a bear market in which 99% of those projects didn't last. Okay. So the way I see it is, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, right? You see now a lot of Bitcoin treasury companies popping up. And yes, they're having big initial pops, but they also go through these violent drawdowns. And the reason for that, in my observation, is because those companies that are launching Bitcoin treasury companies, their first initial investors has to be a hardcore Bitcoin retail investors. Why? Is because Wall Street primarily is not here yet, right? Of course, you have some one-off institutions like Cantor Fitzgerald or Capital Group that would be here, and they're big boys, right? But on the whole, Wall Street is not here. So why is that important, right? Well, why that is important is I kind of differentiate kind of three levels of Bitcoin treasury companies. Level one is you're simply a company converting your cash into Bitcoin. Okay. Now, obviously, the pros of that is that you have this uninflatable asset, and you're going to weather any financial storm that's coming your way. Okay. But the downside of that is you're not going to be able to play the level two and level three game, which is to use your balance sheet to accretively dilute and generate more Bitcoin. Okay. So the way I see multiples of MNAV is the higher the multiple of MNAV relative to the benchmark of MSTR, the higher, the faster the community thinks you can grow your Bitcoin yield, right? Or your Bitcoin per share. So that's level two. And level three is you've now, have a track record, have a loyal fan base, and now you're innovating and creating new financial products. So I think MSTR is level three, right? Where now they've moved ahead into creating Strike and Strive, which taps into the preferred equity market and the debt market. And now they're innovating and leading the charge. So sorry for all that. There's a lot of moving pieces, but I think as a whole, in order for you to be a successful Bitcoin treasury company, not only do you need to start out with having the quantitative side, which is having professionals who have deep Bitcoin knowledge and deep capital markets finance knowledge. That's half of the equation. The other half of the equation is the qualitative side, which is building a community and building out the distribution and marketing channels.
Mm. No, well put, well put. And so, from a marketing perspective, what can other Bitcoin treasury companies do to build a strong, loyal shareholder base like you were describing? Can they just study and copy what Metaplanet has so successfully done, or does each company need to have a different approach?
I think you always have to zig where other people zag, right? If you're simply just trying to copy, you're always going to be a step or two behind. But everybody has their uniqueness, right? So right now, at Strategy, I met quite a few different Bitcoin treasury companies that they're the first in their country, and I think there is a great first movers advantage. So, for example, Metaplanet is the first, and in my knowledge, it's the only Japanese company that's a Bitcoin treasury company. Why is that special? Is because if you study the Japanese market, the stock market hasn't returned anything in over decades, and also the bond market is getting blown out. So they're absolutely yield starved. So they're in a very unique position to absolutely stand out amongst a massive swath of laggards, right? So, but the way I describe it is you need to like kind of operate for a while for the community to like really get behind you, right? So as I said, Metaplanet has been in operations for a little bit over a year. They have an absolutely killer executive team, right? Led by Simon Garovich, who was a Harvard graduate, was a Goldman Sachs derivatives trader. Okay, Dylan Leclerc, despite how young he is, he's been a known commodity in the Bitcoin space. Himself having over 400,000 Twitter followers, so he has a distribution channel. And then the CEO, Yoshimi Abe, she has a 22-year illustrious history at Goldman Sachs. And then also we talk about the marketing component, right? What really clicked for me was they showed a comparison of the first time in which they announced a Bitcoin treasury company. And it was literally in a room that was like what you see in my apartment right here. There's less than maybe 10 people there. Just in a year later, they were in an auditorium where it was not only packed out, but it was standing room only. And now they're talking about the next one, they're going to rent out a stadium, right? And really the kicker that I saw that they understand marketing is twofold. One is their merchandise is getting resold on the open market for not just hundreds, but thousands of dollars, right? The hats, like I was in Strategy World, Simon gave me a hat, a Metaplanet hat, and I was walking around, and so many people were coming up to me, and they were like, "Dude, where'd you get that hat? That hat is rare, right?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" So I like literally looked at Google, sorry, eBay, and they were selling them for $400. And then Simon sent me a screenshot later of they made these Japanese like opera masks. They only made 20 of them, and one of them, at least a screenshot that he showed me, it was sold. Right, it wasn't listed. It was sold for 7,700 USD. Okay, so that's one component is that the free merch, and then they also hired a former Miss Japan, right? So they understand like the marketing angle. That's why I knew like kind of all the stars are aligned in how special they are. Again, taking a step back, it's the two components, right? The quantitative side and the qualitative side. quantitatively, they've already executed and they increased their Bitcoin per share by an astronomical amount. And then on the marketing side, I think they stand heads and shoulders above every other Bitcoin treasury company in that Garovich and the team are the most marketing minded in the community.
Two quick follow-ups. You said they hired whom? I didn't quite catch that.
Her name is Yuri. She is a fellow UCLA Bruin, but she was Miss Japan in the Miss Universe.
Oh, okay. I see. And then the second follow-up, did Simon know at the time, I guess when he gave you the hat, that you were going to be starting the podcast that you're doing on Metaplanet?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, like, I just simply connected with Clyde, and I was like, "Hey, like, I'm interested in this." And yeah, I actually met Dylan for the first time in Strategy World, and Dylan was the one that said, "Hey, these guys are starting a podcast." I was like, "Oh, like, I'm just starting it. Like, I don't know where it's going to go, but yeah, we'll see." And he was very encouraged, and he was like, "Oh, like, get these guys some hats, right?" And so again, it's like it's serendipitous, but he's also increasing his surface area for success by being experimental.
Yeah, I love that. And like you said, there definitely is two sides to it here. Going more to the quantitative side, Klein, wanted to come back to you. I obviously, these companies have performed tremendously well in terms of how their business is growing and also their stock performance. And so investors in these companies have done really well. But wanted to touch on options trading a bit because you mentioned you have a very strong background there, and obviously options can accelerate the volatility and returns potentially on investments. When I found Metaplanet, I sort of thought about it as investing, just investing in their stock was almost like buying a call option because of the tremendous growth potential, but without necessarily the downside of a call option, right? And I'll kind of let you get more into that, but because I also have heard you sort of briefly touch on this concept too. So can you kind of explain your thinking behind that for the audience?
Yes, yeah, and one quick note too, like a lot of people have talked about when will the stock have options, and options in Japan aren't super popular like they are in the U.S. I think that they might be eligible next year, so I would imagine that they'll probably go for that. I think it's a company decision, but I mean, I know this will sound funny, maybe me saying this, but I'm a complete amateur when it comes to options. Just totally self-taught. It's like it's a pain for me to watch videos about the Greeks. Like, I mean, I like it, but it's like painful having to like learn the words behind the sort of intuitive stuff that I've sort of always known, right? Theta for time decay and gamma squeezes and how that works and all that. But, so like before this, I had strategy options. And one thing is, if a stock moves sideways or, volatility goes down. And on top of that, if the days until expiration go down, you're just constantly losing value if things don't go your way. You have to be right on direction, time frame, and even volatility dropping can ruin even if you're right about the other two to some extent. So when I found Metaplanet, and typically I look for 10 baggers, something that can go up, tenfold, and it's difficult, but you see it sometimes. You see it with Tesla, you see it with Bitcoin, different things in different years where it's like, okay, this is the time. I can see the valuation, everything. It makes sense. But typically, options would be where I would go. When I found Metaplanet, it's like, okay, I think this could be a 10 to 100x, and they don't even have options. It is the option, and then I realized, okay, like it has all the upside of a call option. And it helps that it's a single digit stock, but that's not, there's not like a bias there, digit bias or whatever it's called, right? Instead of theta decay, instead of time decay, like you would have with a call option, they're constantly giving Bitcoin yield. They're constantly buying more Bitcoin, and because if you do the math for how accretive the dilution is at like a 3M nav, even at like a 2.5 is way better than a 2, a 3 is way better than a 2. And of course, as you go higher, it's not just less dilution that's necessary, it's actually less dollars that are required to buy the stock to give you the same yield. So like the area under the curve for that's much cleaner, it's much more efficient, it doesn't hurt price as much. Metaplanet's very, very good, and they've talked about letting MNAV move. We're seeing that happen right now, with it around 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever. And it was like, 2.5 a month ago, kind of near the bottom end of the range. So people see what it's capable of. The yield, I mean, this year alone, I think they're just under 200% yield, meaning they've tripled their Bitcoin per share. This is someone, who bought in with a 3M NAV. It's already worked its way into the valuation now. And then everything else past that's bonus points. So it's a call option in a lot of different ways. And it's what I kind of call like an inverse call option in that the theta decay working against you In this case, the company's constantly working for you and baking more premium in. And it's really just a question of how much runway is there, how much volume is there? Is the community going to continue to give them this ability to execute like this? And are they going to keep taking advantage of it prudently without killing the golden goose, without just selling so many shares that they crush price? And they've been really good about that.
Yeah, no, love that. Thanks for the explanation there. And just following up on that, I'm curious from your end, Clem, and then Peter will come to you on this as well. But Clem, why do you think, given Metaplanet's extraordinary run so far, it was the top performing stock in the world in 2024, up more than 30x, and it's continued to go on an incredible rally this year. Why do you think there's still room for the stock to run? And why do you think this might still just be the beginning?
Yeah, intuition started it, and then I wanted to back it with numbers. So I created a model where I came up with like a monthly dilution rate, and I even said, okay, they've been diluting, I think on average, 10 to 15% a month, something like that. I know some months probably quite a bit more. The volume is so strong that they're able to dilute, 2 or 3% on some days. There's quite a few days in May. So I think just the first half of May they diluted about 16% new shares on the market, and the market climbed. From late April through mid May, it went up significantly. So the inflows are insane, and Simon talks about their investor count. I think the number in March was like they had basically like 60,000 individual investors, and he wants them to eventually beat Toyota, I believe, which is at like almost a million, like 900,000 or something. And I mean, that's really a huge part of the game, is that inflows and excitement and volume and everything supporting that MNAV, and allowing them to get to sort of the second stage where it's not so much about selling new shares. So when they hit a certain market cap, they can't dilute 10% a month if they're 100 billion market cap like Strategy is. They were a 1 billion market cap, I think, around the time I got in. Today they might be, I don't know, around a 5 billion or something, since price has kind of gone crazy. But yeah, I mean, they have a lot of room. And even if you model it out like I did, and even if you have MNAV continually dropping, like saying under like a 3.3, like dropping to a 2.5 over 2 years, something like that, they still end up with a very strong amount of Bitcoin. Let's say, up to 1% or so of Bitcoin, maybe more, 210,000, something like that, is kind of the base case for that model, I think, in 2 years, with an MNAV, kind of at or under the 3 range, with decreasing share issuance every single month. And yeah, so I mean, doing worse than they've been doing, and you still end up with these numbers. And then just really looking at what Bitcoin per share yield is that. And once I saw that it's, still a 10, 15, 20 potentially, that's really the multiple that I'm looking for.
And Peter, anything to add to that?
I do advise that people watch Metaplanet Madness episode 2. As Charles alluded to, it is hosted on YouTube under Bull Standard. Because what Klein was saying is that he produced a series of charts that flow right into each other that ultimately ends into bear, base, and bull price projections. And what you'll see is that his projections are very, very conservative. Let me say, like, for example, his bear case is from now to 2 years from now, it's starting at 100,000 for Bitcoin down to 85,000, and a bull of 100,000 up to 200,000 or 250. I forgot one of those two, but those are like pretty conservative. And on top of that conservatism, he's looking at a bear case of 2 MNAV while a bull case of 3 MNAV. And I guess why that's important is because historically, and actually just very recently, it's hit around 9.5 MNAV. So that's why we think it's quite sandbagged. And even then, those numbers come out to be quite eye-opening.
Wonderful. Yeah, we definitely encourage listeners to go ahead and check that out to continue to learn more. But wonderful, you guys survived our first principles, questions and rounds. So love that. Wanted to move on to give our listeners some additional alpha here. So this is just talking about various topics. So, Clem, I understand that you've shared before that you've round tripped on a trade or two and been through a tough stretch as an investor before bouncing back. Looking back on that experience, what lessons really stuck with you, and how do you stay focused and motivated when things aren't going your way?
I try to always leave enough not invested. I'm a lot better at this than I used to be, but I try to always leave enough to where I can bounce back. Even if the thing that I have high conviction in, I was, saying with someone the other day, like even if an asteroid hits Japan, if Japan is no more, like I want to still be able to have a future and have, my assets grow. So even if there's something, insane that I have not been able to see with the stock, even though I'm not expecting it, even if it's a 1 in 1,000, probability event, um, I want to make sure that I can still continue on, live life. I was able to retire last year, so stay retired and grow things from there. Um, so, I tend to kind of 10x and then give up, 2/3 of that, and then 10x and give up 2/3 of that. And that's kind of how the last few years have been.
Wonderful. And as and now for some of these companies continues to run up pretty quickly. As you're talking now about how you sort of protect your downside or put up some guardrails, what happens in that case for you? Do you think it's worth trading in and out of some of these companies and rotating, or do you sort of prefer sticking with a single position through the cycle?
I think that what will most likely work best for me is to stick with the position for as long as I can. That might be 2.5 years, that might be 5 years, whatever that is. Um, as long as the thesis holds. Um, if they, have MNAV compression down to one or something during a bear market, I've told people like, the simple thing is they have almost no debt, at least right now, and they could literally just kind of, hibernate. They could just kind of freeze, wait out the winter, and then come back when Bitcoin price starts accelerating and all MNAVs start to rise again. One of the worst mistakes these companies can make, I think, is to try to dilute when MNAV is let's say under two, decently under two. The math is just really not in your favor. It requires a lot of dollars of inflow to support the stock at that price, essentially, and it just doesn't give you much yield. So the yield story just is pretty weak for share dilution there. So I think Metaplanet keeps executing. I think if I try to jump in and out, then one thing that I don't let myself do typically is to chase something. So I'll buy it if it goes up, but if I get out of it, if I sell a portion or all of a stock, at $10 and then it goes to 15, I'm not buying. I'm waiting for 9 or 8 or something. I can't make myself chase. It's almost like punishment for having sold it in the first place. Like I won't let myself get back in. I've messed it up. So tax implications are pretty crazy too. I think my average cost basis is probably still under $3. It might be around $3 now. And so, with it sitting at 9 or 10 or whatever it is right now, like that's a pretty crazy amount I'd have to pay in taxes. And to me, I see this as potentially a $300 to $400 stock in let's say 5 or 6 years, something like that. So anything under 10 is a steal to me. And um, letting it play out, timing, it's difficult. I can be decent at that with options, but I'm a lot better with just a long-term view on where something like this can go.
Got it. And so lots of discipline there as well. Makes sense. And I imagine that's come with your, just years of investing and trading. Peter, I'm curious for you if you see it any differently. Obviously, there are lots of BTC treasuries popping up these days, almost on a daily basis now. Are there others that you consider? And if so, how do you decide which ones are worth your time and attention?
Um, right now, I'm focused on Metaplanet, although I am trying to keep tabs on the other Bitcoin treasury companies. But for me, um, I actually don't look on the price action side because, again, I think all these new companies that are popping up are very much like the ICOs of 2017, where people are just trying to rotate from MSTR or from the latest hot Bitcoin treasury company to the next. I don't think that's sustainable. What I'm looking at is actually, again, on the qualitative side. I'm looking at the quality of the community who's leading that charge. Does him or her have enough social clout to kind of build a momentum, right? um so like I said, I think Climb and I make a great team in that regard, in the fact that everybody in all of Twitter respects Climb's analysis, right? And he's a very calm guy. You can hear his voice, right? He's not euphoric. He's very disciplined. And then for me, yeah, like I'm quite front facing, right? And I've been in the community since October, and I've amassed a 17, 18,000 follower base in that time. which means that, I guess the community respects me to a degree or another. So yeah, it's again how I emphasize both the qualitative and the quantitative side. I'm trying to effectively emulate that at the Metaplanet Madness podcast side.
Yeah, and I love how you're stressing that point about the management team, the community. I really do think that's a underrated part of analysis in this space. You're also just briefly touching there on social media and your experience there. Before we close, I wanted to hit on that just quickly here. You've both grown such a strong following on X, starting from basically zero, I believe. And I know your journeys were a bit different, but can you break down for our listeners how you built that audience? And for someone watching at home, spotting similar opportunities but are unsure about how to jump in or where they'll actually fit in, what first steps would you recommend to start engaging online?
Great question. For me, at first, I just think like have fun with it. A lot of people want to come in and be like, well, I want to either copy somebody or I want, to hit certain metrics. I think that copying someone, again, people are going to sniff out that you're not authentic to yourself, especially Bitcoiners, like they can smell that out quickly. Number two is have fun instead of like worrying about the metrics, because if you're grinding the metrics, like again, people will feel that energy of like you're just trying to push out content like that, you don't really believe in, and you're just not going to get traction and you're going to get frustrated, right? So just come in with yourself and see if you even want to do this, right? Like if you do, then you have to be consistent, right? Like for example, I remember at the very beginning of the year in the irresponsibly long MSTR sub community, sentiment was like at absolute bottom. And that's because we came off a blow up top and we crashed down real hard, right? And so I was like, well, how can I do my part, right? And I started a 30 for 30 challenge, which means every single day for 30 days, I'm gonna write a thread to add value back to the community, right? There was one other gentleman that followed me along on that, but I just showed up every day, right? And matter of fact, none of those threads gone viral. But what that did for me was it developed a consistency muscle, right? And then right after that, I was like, okay, I'm just going to write a thread every single day. And I quickly figured out a way to generate threads that will often go 100K in impressions, often, right? Like in a week, about one or two of those will gain over 100,000 impressions. I have two that's gone, over a million impressions, right? And so I figured out how to talk to the algorithm. And at the same time, what are the topics that I wrote about? I think Twitter is a platform that really emphasizes um, being on the cutting edge, right? So it's like if there's a new development, if you can quickly talk about this in your unique stance, they're going to reward you, as opposed to evergreen content, right? That like people like evergreen content you can think of as like YouTube, where if it's a good piece of evergreen content, the algorithm will show it to new viewers, even for years on end, right? But Twitter emphasizes recency, okay? And then also, if you're small, this is a big alpha, at least for me, is figure out who you admire in that community and then try to shine a spotlight on him or her, right? Especially if you follow someone who you really admire, most likely they have a bigger following than you, right? And so I call it, creating waves for other people and surfing the wave yourself, right? So for example, like when Lynn Alden did a podcast with Jack Farley on Jack Farley's podcast, right? I was watching the video anyways, and I was just going to break it down, right? And it's like, what did I enjoy about it? What did I find valuable, right? That thread got 1.1 million views because Lynn Alden got put on and she retweeted it, and that generated again 1.1 million impressions. And so I did that for so many people in the community, right? And then also you get to learn something about other people, right? For example, I won't FUD this person's name, but I admire his content. I bought his book. I read his book. I wrote a viral thread on his book that generated him like at least 100 sales, right? And I got him on like my live spaces, right? But he doesn't follow many people, and he didn't follow me back, right? And so I said, hey, no problem. That's okay, right? But that also teaches me about like, do I want to work with this type of person down the road, right? So like there's levels to like a lot of psychology. A lot of Bitcoiners are very logical people, but they completely de-emphasize the importance of the EQ side, right? I ask people this all the time. I said, what is more rare than 21 million Bitcoins, right? And I'd say it's Bitcoin talent, right? I would say it's orders of magnitude more rare than Bitcoin itself, right? I was like, how many people can generate content, develop a following, build community, you can probably count them on your two hands, right? In Bitcoin, right? So if they're that rare and you want to work with them and partner up with them, you need to shower them with attention and love authentically, right? Put a spotlight on them, add value to them, and then if they're willing to work with you, then ride the wave that you generated, right? But like, I don't know about Klein, but like some people would try to lowball me. I'm like, dude, like why would I quit my high paying traditional finance job, right? Have build a following only for you to offer me something like, oh, let me give you a discount code so that if you generate sales from me, you get 10%. It's like that makes no sense. You know what I'm saying? Like not only did you waste my time, you also disrespected me, right? Because like you have no skin in the game and you're trying to offload on me and just say, oh, I'll give you 10%. Right? That's not how you develop relationships in this business, right? You commented, I think, before we started this, you're like, hey, well, like I told you Strategy World was my first Bitcoin event, right? And you're like, whoa, you seem as if you've gone to like 10 of these. Like you seem to know everyone. Well, it's because I've done all these things that I told you, right? I really focus on the emotional side of things, right? I'm trying to always highlight people. And I think Climb can really attest to this is that anyone, like as Metaplanet Madness is blowing up, sometimes people will reply in my thread is like, Peter, like, thank you for your amazing show. I'm like, hey, like I'm not the star of the show. Climb is the star of the show, right? I'm always trying to highlight and like deflect my spotlight onto my partners who are better than me, right? So that kills my own ego. At the same time, my partners never feel disrespected. They always feel valued. And if you do that compounded over a long period of time, everybody will want to work with you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, thanks for breaking that down. I think that was really great. And I think one of the central points I think that you're alluding to there is what you put out will ultimately come back to you.
Always.
So I
Absolutely.
think there's a term that this investor that I really like, he uses called compounding goodwill. To the point you're making, I'm curious for those people who tried to lowball you like that. How did you sort of navigate that and communicate to them in terms of maybe turning down those offers, but doing so in a way that's still respectful. Like you mentioned, it sounds like you build long-term relationships and it could be a small business. So how did you sort of navigate that?
Yeah, I love that you highlighted the fact that it is a very small network. Like I've been in this space literally since October of last year, and I seem to know a lot of people, right? And so word does get around, right? But again, it takes a lifetime to build a reputation and it takes 5 seconds to ruin it, right? And Bitcoiners, especially the OG ones, they got a bit of an ego, right? Because they got in early, they're rich, and now they have influence, and they think that they can just offer you some lowball stuff and you'll take it. So instead, I always just think about like judo or jiu-jitsu, right? If they're coming off real strong with the ego, and just recognize it. Be like, hey, you're the big dog. Like I'm just a small little fry. Like I'm just trying to, build this sustainably. Like, down the road, we can definitely work together. And dude, I'm rooting for you, man. Like what's good for you, what is good for Bitcoin, and what's good for Bitcoin is good for me. So just emphasize like, hey, like, I'm so new to the space. Like I'm just trying to build my little corner and I respect you and I want to work with you down the road.
Wonderful, wonderful. And before we wrap, Climb, if you have anything to add to that, what were sort of the key factors that you think were important for building your own audience, and what first steps would you recommend to any of our followers who want to start engaging online?
So I think most of my life I'm really quiet by nature, so I try not to say anything unless it's kind of worth listening to. Otherwise, I can just keep my mouth shut and it's more efficient just to think the thoughts. It's a lot quicker too. So with online, it's very much like in person. There's things that I know a lot about that I can add value by adding to the discussion, a certain perspective. For me, it's been if people are already drawing attention to something, that's fine. Maybe I can look at it from a different angle. And that's what I like to read too. If other people do that, that's what I love the most instead of just, a bunch of people parroting the same narratives. I try to only share things that I think are meaningful for other people, that they can't find everywhere else they look, and that they, hopefully can get enough enjoyment where they actually want to share it with other people and say, yeah, hey, this is what I was thinking, but I just didn't know how to put it into words, or this would, whatever, I thought this too yesterday, or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. And just release those ideas. So those ideas aren't mine. I'll share them once I've said them. They're just free. They can, spread around as much as people want to, and or not. And if they don't, then I'll learn from that, and I'll be like, okay, maybe that wasn't as brilliant an idea as I thought. So I'll filter those out better in the future, right? So yeah, I guess that's basically it. I just if I can add value, I'll try to add value. I try to be useful. That's, helps me sleep at night if I've done something useful. So hopefully that continues.
Love
I
that.
just
Yeah.
do want to add something, right? A lot of people who are intimidated to jump in and start contributing, I understand that mindset right? Because again, I had my own online business before, and I understand how intimidating it is, right? But let me try to hopefully give you a different perspective. Especially in a world of artificial intelligence and people not being original or authentic and just like copying other people, if you have a point of view and you're willing to put yourself out there on a consistent basis, you will find your group, right? You have to think social media, it's a multi-trillion dollar industry that simply boils down to one concept. And that one concept is if you're a content creator and you're creating constant contact, the algorithm or the social media platform is simply trying to match you with your ideal followers. And the more content you produce, the more data they have to optimize your follower base. So if you just get out of your own way and be like, oh, I'm not original or whatever, just try. Put yourself out there. You will find your voice, and the algorithm in turn will, will reward you over time.
Love it. Love it. You both are creating and putting out tons of content, but what are you currently consuming that's helping you learn or inspire you?
I guess I'll start. I think that's a very brilliant question because the way I think about it is what you consume becomes your thoughts becomes your words becomes your actions compounded over a long period of time becomes your identity. And so I'm very careful on what I consume, right? And this is why like some people will look at like my following base and be like, oh, like he's just trying to be like pretentious and like doesn't follow many people back. That's not it. I try to follow very specific people that I think has some sort of alpha edge that I find valuable, right? So that the feed and my algorithm that I receive from those people is as high signal as it gets, right? Of course, there's always going to be some noise, but I'm always trying to curate my information diet. And so my primary source is Twitter, and my secondary source is YouTube.
Love it. And how about you, Klon?
Yeah, for me, especially with things that take a certain amount of time, half hour podcast or an hour podcast, whatever it is. I almost never speed them up. I know it's more efficient. I like to digest at the rate that they're saying it. It just works better for me. It lets me think between with pauses and all that in their speech. But I try to consume things that I don't just want to consume once. So if there's a podcast like there's been a couple with Dylan or Simon, with various people that now I've probably watched 5 or 10 times, and I know that I'll watch them more because just like a really good movie, you're going to see something you didn't see. You're going to think of something different when you hear it again. And so I try to go for the highest quality stuff that I'm going to want to put on repeat, and really try to squeeze as much out of that as I can.
And I would add that like if there are people who are consistently high signal, like Climb, on Twitter, you can set alarms to their tweets. So that's exactly how I got into Metaplanet. He literally was saying, "Hey, Metaplanet, low MNAV, they've been going crazy, like they've been acquiring Bitcoin like crazy, yet the price is like low. Like I'm starting to build a position." I literally was like, boom, like. But that took months of trying to filter out amongst the noise. And then again, I literally every time he tweets, I'm looking at what he's tweeting, right? So finding the noise amongst the signal is such an important skill set, especially going forward, that it literally is going to compound. I think it's the best compounder, even than Bitcoin and other Bitcoin investing related investments.
Yeah, I love that. An information edge, and obviously in today's day and age, it's the speed that matters. So having those alerts turn on, you'll get that information very quickly. Well, just wanted to give you guys another shout out for the work you guys are doing. It's very exciting. I love what you guys are doing with your project on Metaplanet and the podcast and everything you guys are posting on X and sharing with the community. And I love the dynamic too here. It's great. And obviously the initiative you guys have taken to go ahead and do all that stuff. So, where can people follow your journey and keep up with your work, both together and then individually?
Yeah. So as you see in my name right there, at BTC Bullwriter is my Twitter handle. So I'm primarily on X. And again, all Metaplanet Madness podcasts are going to be redistributed after the live stream, which is always Saturdays at noon Pacific, unless otherwise stated. And then we're working on creating Japanese dubs so that the Japanese community can also hear how we think about the investment.
Climb?
Yeah, I'm on X lots of the time, an embarrassing amount of time. I feel like Elon Musk in that way. Like I'm just on there all the time, right? But like, yeah, I'm at actually Climber because at Climb That Ladder was already taken, sadly. Um, but yeah, so that's where I'm at. And on it, like I answer most of my DMs. Sometimes, if I don't have time, it'll just be a couple words, and but I try to engage with just about every comment and stuff. So I'm pretty easy to get a hold of.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for a great conversation, guys. Really appreciate you joining us today. Take care.
Thank you, Charles.